Hey y'all, I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in to learn how to build your audience and reach more readers on podcast. Last week on episode 114, we talked about 7 reasons why you might want to start a podcast to build your author platform. And I'm guessing if you push play on today's episode, you might be ready to start one. So today we're going to talk about the first 5 things you need to start your podcast. Well, let me clarify, y'all. 2 things first. I'm talking about starting an audio podcast because that's much simpler than video. Not that you can't record video at the same time or simply use video to promote your audio podcast. And we're going to get to all that in the coming weeks, don't worry. But today I'm just talking about audio. And second, I'm talking about starting a solo podcast. I really hope that you'll allow your listeners to connect with your voice first, especially if you've set any of the goals we talked about in the last episode. You can always add a co-host later, and you can always add guests. But both take just a little bit more planning, and I don't want either of those to slow you down if God has laid start a podcast on your heart in 2024. And as you get going podcasting, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, about who you serve, about what you want to share with them, and what part of all of that brings you joy. And the coolest thing ever about podcasting, y'all, is that it's your show. You can do it your way. You can change it up anytime you want, as long as you communicate that with your listeners if it's a change that affects them. So, y'all, it's important to start simple and grow along the way. Don't get overwhelmed to the point you don't even start at all, and this just becomes another thing on your to-do list for maybe next year. Because your future readers are out there today and they are in need of your encouragement and your inspiration. So don't make them wait, okay? If you're with me, I'll have my show notes linked here in the description so you can easily find all this information along with links to my favorite resources and courses, so no worries about taking notes. All right, let's do this. Here's the 5 things you need first to start a podcast. Number 1, the name of your podcast. Make it easy to say, easy to understand, and easy to remember. So I would jot down a few names you're thinking of and check to make sure they're not already taken by searching your podcast player or even just going on Google and searching to make sure there's not a podcast by that name. Or if you have kind of an unusual name you're coming up with, make sure there's not a business that has that name because they could have the copyright. So be sure and check that out first when you name your podcast. Then second, you're going to need a cover art image. And that's, the little square you see within a podcast player. So when people listen to your podcast, they're going to see your cover art image. And you can create one using Canva. If you're familiar with Canva, Canva, they have a podcast template. Or you could hire it out to a designer if you have somebody maybe working on your website design, your branding. Or you could even barter with a friend who has design skills and figure out how you could swap out services so that they could design you a beautiful cover art image. And I wanted to mention that in the very beginning because sometimes it does take a little extra time to get that started and get it finalized because, you'll go back and forth, or if you design it yourself, you might want to, post it to your followers or to your email list and get, maybe just post it to your friends and get some input. You might have a couple of different designs to get input on. So you want to do that early because you want to get that kind of nailed down because you're going to use that moving forward. But just know it can be easily changed. So don't let that be something that slows you down because you can get your podcast started. And when you're ready, you can change your cover art and it's super simple. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that in future episodes, but I just want you to for sure be thinking about the name of your podcast and creating your cover art image. Then number 3, you're going to want to get a USB microphone and a good set of headphones. And y'all, this probably hung me up the longest because I kept hearing good and bad things. And so like one of the very first conferences I went to on podcasting, everybody was just like saying horrible things about the inexpensive, budget-friendly microphones that you can use for podcasting. And I was like looking around the crowd like, oh my gosh, did I buy, am I buying the wrong microphone? And then, it helped me so much to be able to talk to other podcasters and hear what they have been using, and it's worked just fine. And one of my favorite podcasters, Chelsea Joe, she has a podcast about, systems in your home and in your business. And she just mentioned earlier this year, I think she has like 2 million podcast downloads. She's only been doing it for a couple of years. She still uses a very inexpensive microphone, and she records in her closet. And it works fine for her. So don't get wrapped up in what kind of fancy microphone you need, or, especially if you can't afford something like that. Don't let that slow you down from starting, because there are budget-friendly microphones, and you just want a super easy one to plug into your computer and go. And get a good pair of headphones. I have just like a noise-canceling pair that I put on my head, and it's more so you can hear yourself. You don't hear all the surrounding noises if you have kids at home like I do, or a husband that works from home, or, the lawnmower's going on outside, or your dog's barking. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I am going to put that in my blog post with links for you. But I just wanted to at least say, don't let that slow you down if you are getting wound up on what microphone and headphones to use. Then number 4, you're going to need software to record and edit on, and you can get started for free. I started on Audacity, which is a free program for both Mac and Windows computers. Now I use Descript. It's Descript, and again, it'll be linked in the show notes. It's so simple because you can record on it, editing as if you would a Word document. It automatically edits out your audio. And again, I'm just talking about audio. You can do video on there as well. You can record and edit it too. I haven't done that yet, so I didn't want to be a proponent of that yet. And again, we're talking about audio podcasts, but that's a super easy thing to do if you have a solo podcast, is to use Descript. And if you want a super simple way to start with interviews, you can use Zoom. And we're going to be talking about that in future episodes as well. But I just want to make sure that again, it's not that you have to have anything fancy. You don't even have to outsource your editing. If it's not something you enjoy doing, you can do that. But it's also something you can do yourself in the beginning. And again, like we're talking about, you can start slow and grow as you're able to do that. Then number 5 is our podcast hosting platform. And I recommend Buzzsprout. There's several out there that you can look into, and I'll be sure and put a link to where you can check them all out. But my favorite is Buzzsprout because it was so easy for me to start the podcast. Their service is amazing, and I never had one issue when it was time to upload the different places you upload. You just follow them step by step, and everything happens like magic, honestly. And I am in so many Facebook groups that talk about different hosting companies, and I hear a lot about, oh, this didn't happen on time. What do I do? This happened. This mistake happened. And it's never the case with Buzzsprout. So I'm a huge advocate for them. You can choose other ones if you want, but my choice is Buzzsprout. So I'll be sure and put a link to that in the show notes as well. Those are the first 5 things you need. You don't need anything else yet, and you can't do anything else yet unless you have those 1 through 5 things in place. Plus, y'all, let's be honest. I know some of you will just take this list and run with it, but for some of you, these are the 5 things you are going to turn around and ask your podcasting friends about to see what they used when they first started, what they're using now, and what they recommend. And I know getting that input is so valuable. So at least now you have a list to ask your friends. Hey, I got these recommendations. What do you recommend? And I'm totally okay with that, y'all, because I just want you to have whatever you can ASAP so you can get started and start serving your future readers today, right? And you don't want anything to be slowing you down. Now, you might be wondering why we didn't talk about who your audience is or what you'll be talking about on the show. Yeah, they're pretty important, right? Because without an audience or topics, you won't even have a podcast. But again, I think we often get too wrapped up in it. Even my clients who ask, what will I talk about on a podcast? Or who is going to listen to my podcast? They know the answers, because they know their why for starting a podcast that we talked about in the last episode. And if you're writing a book, you know what it's about, right? And you know who it's for. And same for your podcast. If you're using it to build an audience and reach more readers, you know who it's for and you know what you're going to be talking about. So we have to start somewhere, and you can hone in on a more targeted audience or more targeted topics as you go along. But we have to get started, y'all. So now once you get these first 5 things in place, you're going to want to know, what are my next steps? How do I start recording episodes? And that's what we're going to be talking about next week, because I'm going to be sharing what you need to include in your first few episodes, including your podcast trailer and why you need one. I can't wait to share it with you. And don't forget to click on the link below in the podcast description so you can get to the show notes of everything we talked about today, as well as links to my favorite resources. And thanks for tuning in today. And as always, I'll be there for you next time to help you build your audience and reach new readers one podcast at a time. See you then.